Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to begin my thoughts on what's been revealed at the COVID inquiry this week. Dominic Cummings will of course be the star attraction, but we've had some provable nonsense from Boris Johnson's principal private secretary from the time, someone who might best be known as Party Marty for his role in some of the worst of the Partygate offences. His evidence today highlights the importance of not letting the Tories get away with claiming hindsight. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So Martin Reynolds, otherwise known as Party Marty after his Partygate escapades, was giving evidence to the COVID inquiry today. In it, he was having to accept that the government made a great many mistakes, but he was trying to characterise them as innocent ones. Give you an example of one response. He said, with the benefit of hindsight, it does appear we should have been far more vigorously looking and testing our arrangements for what was coming, and that would arguably have made a big difference. With the benefit of hindsight. Hindsight. Let me put this into a little bit of context. Right back when David Cameron was Prime Minister, nearly 10 years before COVID hit, the number one threat to the nation, according to his Conservative government, was a global pandemic. Number one threat to the nation. David Cameron thought it was sufficiently serious that he brought it up in speeches at international summits. In 2016, the government ran Operation Cygnus in order to test our readiness for a global pandemic. This resulted in a number of recommendations which were mostly not implemented. One system which was partially implemented was a dedicated pandemic response team. That would have sounded like a brilliant idea, absolutely invaluable when COVID struck. Unfortunately, Boris Johnson dissolved it in 2019. Impeccable timing, as always. Basically, what I'm saying is, we didn't just expect a pandemic at some point. It wasn't just something, oh, it might happen, we better prepare for it. No, we thought, our government, the Conservative government, thought it was the most serious threat to the UK. Number one threat to the UK. More serious than war, terrorism, or even the Tories. The government ran exercises in order to test our ability to deal with it, found weaknesses, and received recommendations. Most recommendations were then ignored, meaning the government of the time, it was under Theresa May by then, and then of course Boris Johnson, made a conscious decision not to take the number one threat to the nation seriously. Then Johnson actually reversed some of the few recommendations which were adopted, suggesting that Johnson was happy to be especially reckless in the face of what his own government. It's not just that we thought it was the number one threat to the nation 10 years ago. We even in 2019, it was still officially accepted as the number one threat to the nation. Boris Johnson thought it was fine to be reckless in the face of that number one threat to the nation. It cannot, in all seriousness, be claimed that we should have paid more attention to arrangements in hindsight. My worry is that this little gem will not get a great deal of emphasis in the mainstream media, and if it's even mentioned in passing, the context which I have described will not accompany it. This is like the perfect example of the disconnect between the people and politics, which the media is supposed to bridge. The Tories are banging their hindsight drum very loudly. They know they cannot possibly get through this inquiry with a clean bill of health. If the government response to COVID were like a restaurant kitchen, it would be full of rat droppings and have Gordon Ramsay sat in the corner crying, too upset to even swear at anyone. So their tactic is to claim that all the mistakes could only be seen in hindsight, that they were doing their best, but that this was a unique situation, lessons learned, I'm sure it'll be better next time. Absolute bollocks. Since when is failing to implement recommendations being a bad thing, something you can only see in hindsight? Because I'll tell you something. Let's say the Conservatives did win the next election. The COVID inquiry finishes its report, recommendations published. That Conservative government will not implement them. That is guaranteed. And we know that because they didn't implement the last lot of recommendations. You know, since when is getting rid of your pandemic response team, when you are expecting a pandemic, only a bad thing in hindsight? You know, this only works on the public because although the government were expecting a pandemic, the public were not. and the media are not pointing out that the government were. You know, Party Marty also had some nonsense on the WhatsApp messages, just by the by. The Tory client media is currently shining a bit of a spotlight onto the fact that members of the Scottish government seem to have deleted WhatsApp messages from the time. Fair enough. But they're strangely muted on the fact that both Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak are not handing over their own messages. But Party Marty said, in regards to UK government messaging, that not all WhatsApp messages needed to be retained. He said that ephemeral ones weren't necessary. Here's the thing though. That is not an excuse to have gaps in the government records. Ephemeral would mean things like asking someone if they've got dinner plans that evening or if they saw that documentary last night. Government business has to be recorded and retained. The rules seem clear enough to me, and do explicitly mention WhatsApp, just for the avoidance of doubt. And when Party Marty wasn't trying to blame Hindsight, he was then blaming Dominic Cummings. He said that if the government were distracted at the time, it was because of Cummings's drive to recruit weirdos, which is the term that Cummings used at the time. But the thing is, Dominic Cummings was just a political advisor. He was the most senior political advisor, but he was just an advisor. It was Boris Johnson in charge of decisions. So this is another smokescreen. The evidence being given in this phase of the COVID inquiry really is a serious danger to the Conservatives and to Rishi Sunak personally, as he was the second most senior member of the government at the time. The top priority for the government is to give the impression in their evidence that they were making the best decisions they could in a fast-moving, unexpected situation with limited understanding even amongst experts. The reality is they were prioritising greed and ideology in a situation for which they had ample warning, and they were ignoring the experts. But they will attempt to persuade the public that the mistakes were only easy to see in hindsight. And the media will do their part by not reporting on the inquiry revelations at all if they can help it, and when they have to, by putting the emphasis on the defences used without any fact-checking or relevant context being added. Which means, of course, that it will be for opposition parties, most especially Labour, to draw attention to the inconsistencies in their evidence. Granted, this will become a lot easier in government. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.